Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim Daf Samach Zayin. It's the daf for Shabbat. It's also the beginning of the 10th chapter. The 10th and the 11th chapter, a unit, is going to end our Masechet. And the unit deals with a father and a husband who have rights to annul the vows of their wives or their daughter. Okay, in other words, a father can annul the vows of his daughter, and a husband can annul the vows of his wife. Okay, this whole thing with our modern eye rubs us a little bit the wrong way. I'm not going to be able to make excuses and explain it in a way that's going to be super fully satisfying, I would say. But again, I think all these sugyot need to be understood in the context of the time and in the sense of, first of all, I want you to understand that a father, this is one thing we're going to discuss soon, that a father can only nullify the vows of his daughter until the age of 12 or 12 and 6 months. After that time period, she becomes a bogeret, okay, when she reaches the age of 12 and she has simanim, signs, two pubic hairs grow, she's already from that stage for the next 6 months, she's called a na'ara. She's no longer a minor tana, she's now a na'ara. And from that time, the father, after she becomes a bogeret, after those 6 months pass, she is no longer in her father's domain, right? In my house, it's more like when you're 18 or when you're 21 or when you move out of the house. Otherwise the parents do have certain rights to their children. In this case, the father does not have rights for the daughter after that age, which is interesting in and of itself. I kind of turned it into I compared it to children. Here you'll notice it's only girls and not boys, not sons, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. Again, I don't have a good answer for why this is. Part of it is really just the way their society function. Remember also, again, this doesn't answer all the questions, why specifically females, but there was this interest in not having a lot of vows being made. And therefore, just like we spend time discussing how to undo vows of your own, here are ways to undo vows of other people. Again, it's only men undoing the vows of women, but it is giving us more opportunities that if people we think shouldn't have made the vow, there's someone kind of looking out to basically undo it for them. However, we are going to see, which maybe makes us feel a little bit better about it as women, that there are restrictions on these. The husband can't just annul any vows of his wife. Okay, first of all, we talked about a woman who's a Nadranit. Okay, if she takes too many vows, it's a grounds for divorce, if you remember. So if a woman has vows upon her, the husband can annul them, but only certain types of vows. We're not going to get into that today, but we will get into it down the road, which are vows that he has rights to annul, which is interesting to see that he doesn't have full opportunity to nullify any vows. It's really vows that have some sort of impact on him for the most part, although we'll see what exactly these are, or things that are somewhat dangerous to the woman, okay, where then he's allowed to get involved and undo the neder. It could be, again, this doesn't sound very positive about women, but it could be they were concerned. Maybe it was something women did in those days and they took a lot of vows and they wanted to protect the women. They thought, we know better than them, which again, in a world where women are less educated, which is the world that they were living in, it makes a little bit of sense that maybe the women, as being less educated, might take more vows and get them into situations that maybe they would need to get out of, and therefore they have the rights to undo it. There's also a time factor in terms of they can't just forever. There's a certain thing about it. The Torah says on the day that he hears about it. So once it passes the day he hears, it sounds like he can't anymore. What if we're going to see there's what's kiyum haneder. He says, oh, I accept that vow. And there's undoing the neder. I don't accept it. Okay, so we'll talk about the value or the effects of once he accepts it, then he can really no longer go back, although maybe there are ways. Anyway, we'll get into this. So the first thing we see is I mentioned that a woman, once she's a bogeret, she's already 12 months, has two hairs of puberty, and then waits 6 months, which is the time period of na'arut. After that, she's a bogeret. So our Mishnah starts off with na'ara murasa. We're starting at the bottom of Samach Vav, Amabet. If she's a woman who is a na'ara, she's at this in-between stage. She's not a minor anymore, although she could be a minor. Here, it's really trying to exclude, and the Ran says this explicitly, it's coming to exclude a bogeret. Someone who's past na'arut, her father no longer can annul her vows. But when she's in that stage of na'ara, or before, and she's betrothed already to someone, avia uba'ala mifirim nidareha. Both her father and her husband have rights to annul her vow. Now, at this point, it's not clear. Do they both do it together? Do you need both to do it, or only one? It's a good question. In a second, it's going to be made very clear. On the next page, which is starting our daf, hefer ha'av v'lo hefer ha'bal, if the father annuls it and the husband does not, or hefer ha'bal v'lo hefer ha'av, or the husband does it and not the father, eino mufal, it's not. In other words, neither has, and this is very interesting, in this stage where she's kind of in between, and if you remember, she still lives in her father's house. She only moves to the husband's house after marriage. And yet it tells us that the father doesn't have full rights to her anymore, and neither does the husband. They kind of share the rights. And that's why only if the two of them together annul the vow is the vow going to be annulled. And I obviously don't need to tell you, the Mishnah says, that if one of them said the vow is good and stands, obviously then the other can annul it. Now, really doesn't need to tell you this. It's a little strange why. It's true the Mishnah says, I don't need to tell you this, but the Mishnah obviously need to tell us this, otherwise they wouldn't. So we're going to have to figure out what the Mishnah is telling us by giving us that line, which seems incredibly unnecessary. So first the Gemara says there's actually another line that's unnecessary, because the line, if one does and not the other, then it's not annulled. Well, isn't that the same thing as the first line? If you read that literally, I said it's not so clear, but if you read it literally, it says her father and her husband annul her vows, which means both of them together. So what did you need the next line to tell you? To which the Gemara says, just in case you thought sometimes and really means or. So maybe it's either or, kamashma, and it comes to teach you, no, it's not either or, just so you don't get confused by that first line and think it means either or. No, it has to be both. The next line is dealing with that last line. The next section of the Gemara is dealing with that last line. Why do you need to say this? If one nullifies and the other one doesn't, one undoes her vow and the other one doesn't, right? If you said hefer ze below klum is nothing, then of course, if one of them said the vow is a good vow, then and established the vow, then of course one can't annul, the other one can't annul it. So why do you need this? The next two words the Bach takes out. Doesn't seem to really belong. What it's needed for is to teach you kigon. Now we're going to learn that last line means something a little bit different than we thought. Let's say one annulled it and one established it. So first the husband annuls the vow. Now what does he need to make sure it's annulled? The father has to get on board. But instead of the father annulling, what does he do? He's kiyem. Okay, that obviously doesn't work. That doesn't help us yet. So first the husband annulled. Then the father establishes it. Now that father goes back, could be either or. I'm just giving an example. The father goes back, and he goes and he undoes, he goes and asks the Chacham, you know what? I established this, but I really didn't want to. I really want to undo it. So he goes to get it undone, okay, which apparently you can do. Maybe you could say now that whatever he was mekayem is now undone. So let's just erase as if it never existed. And then kamash. And then what? Well, then the father annuls, and that should go together very well with the husband's annulment, and that should work. Kamash malan. That's what this line comes to tell you. If one of them was mekayem the neder after it was annulled by the other one, and then he undoes it and he annuls it, you can't put those two annulments together. This is a very interesting thing conceptually. Kamash malan, that comes to teach you the two annulments of the husband and the father have to come together. Now, this usually b'vatachad means at the same time. It doesn't have to be at the same time. But there can't be a break of kiyum between them. If one establishes the neder in the middle, then you can't then, even if you erase the fact that he established it, it's never fully erased, I guess you could say. And you can't put the two annulments together because they're considered broken in the middle. Now, first of all, there's a machloket among the Rishonim about, so what happens now? Can they annul this vow ultimately? Can the father now, he undid his establishing of the neder, now he does hafara, he annuls it, And then the husband can come and do hafara also, and that works. Some people say yes. Some people say since there was kiyum in the middle, they can never go back and annul this vow. And it can't be annulled at all. Because there was hafara and then kiyum, and you can't put them back together later. You can't kind of like redo the whole thing from the beginning. Either which way, it raises this conceptual issue about how to understand this annulment of the two of them. And obviously, it's almost like it's not like each one can annul and you have check, and okay, you have annulment of both, that works. No, it's that the annulment of both of them is viewed as something together. It's like a combined thing. And since it got broken up in the middle and there wasn't agreement with the two sides, it's almost like they both have to agree about this. For some reason, it's very important that there be agreement of both sides at once in one kind of move. And that unless you have them both together, it doesn't really work because each one doesn't have enough strength on his own, because she's kind of it's very interesting. Almost like, right, we're viewing this woman. She's at this in-between stage, in between leaving her parents, going into her husband's domain, and it's sort of like almost nobody's in charge of her, and it's the two of them together are in charge of her, and therefore the two of them together have to do it in a combined way and not in a way that's not combined. It's very interesting to think about. It obviously requires more research and more understanding. Okay, moving on now. The next section, this is going to take us to the end of today's daf and even into tomorrow's daf, which is Nara Morasa Avia Ubala Nedarim Nedaraha Minala. From where do we get it from that both can undo her vows? So now we're going to pull up the study guide and we're going to read the psukim and we're going to start explaining. So the first section in Bamidbar, chapter 30, we have 3 sections of someone who can annul the vows of another person. Okay, we have the first section. Isha ki tidor neder l'Hashem. A woman makes a vow to God, va'asra isar bebeit avia b'neureha, and she forbids something to herself in her father's house. Notice she's in her father's house here. B'neureha, when she's still a na'ara or younger than that. V'shama avia et nidra, he hears the vow, v'asra asher asar l'Hashem, or whatever she forbids to herself. V'cherisha avia, he's silent. V'kamu kol nidareha v'chol isur asher asar l'Hashem yakum. Whatever she does is valid, it's established because he was silent. And that is translated as, I allow this to go. But if he doesn't allow it, so basically he has the power to undo them. God should forgive her. Because he didn't want her to go against her vow. He knew she wasn't going to really be able to keep her word. And therefore, God will forgive her because her father protected her. But this is, by the way, if you look at the psukim, it's trying to show this is a way of protecting the women. Okay? Often, some of these things that we often find offensive are really instituted for protection of the woman. Second section. Obviously, it begs the question, why are they not capable of deciding on their own, right? But that's, again, hard, in a world where they're less educated, maybe one can possibly understand it. Again, it doesn't fully answer it. I'm not presuming to have all the answers here. Second section. If she becomes connected to a man, okay, usually havaya means kiddushin, betrothal, which we're going to get to in a minute. Unidareha aleha, and she has vows upon her. Or she says something to forbid something. Vishama isha b'yom shamo, and he hears on the day he hears it. Vecherishan, he was silent. So it's all established, everything, right? Her Nedarim are valid. But if on the day he hears, he decides to annul her vow, right? So basically, etc., right? So he can do that. And again, God will forgive her. Third section. Now, the simple reading of this is first section, she's living in her father's house. Second section, she's at this in-between stage. Notice, by the way, it only said that the husband annuls. It didn't say anything about the father. Third section, in Beit Isha Nidrav, she's already in her husband's house. Or she forbade herself by swearing. Vishama Isha, and he hears, her husband hears, and he was silent, okay, etc. I'm not going to go through all this, but basically, he can annul the vow. Now, the second and the third section seem pretty redundant because both of them, the husband, and notice, none of them says the husband and the father. Okay, so let's start with our question. So our question is, Minalan, where do we get that the father and the husband both annul the vows while she's betrothed? Amar Rabba, Rabba says, no, we learn it from here. Amakra, ve'im hayoti leish unidareha aleha. Here we have it. If she's betrothed, Now notice what we didn't talk about is this ve'im. Ve'im, they say, connects it to the previous section, the vav, and if, which means that what was true for the previous is true still now, which is the father still can annul them. And in addition, the husband can annul them. This isn't so crazy because generally she lives in her father's house. So whatever was true in her father's house should still be true even though she's betrothed because she's still living with him. If you remember, we learned about truma. She actually could start eating truma, theoretically, like the husband, even though most things during the betrothal, she's kind of, right? She's actually in between because she still needs a divorce from betrothal. She's still really considered married, but they're not actually living together. So we're at this in between. And there's all these things, right? The truma, we had some reasons because she's living with her father, so she can't really eat truma, right? That's in the case where she's marrying a Kohen, because maybe she'll feed her family members, or maybe he'll find a blemish in her later and he won't end up marrying her, and then it turns out she shouldn't have eaten the truma. So the erusin is always this in between. And she's still the financial responsibility mostly of her father. So the more obvious would be the father, and the Torah is telling you also the husband. So now we're going to have 3 questions on Rav, okay, on Rabbah. 3 questions. So the first question, okay, if you see I charted, or I kind of put it out here, there's 1 question. We're going to have 2 answers to that question. There's 2 questions, a second question we're going to answer, and then a third question, and we're going to have an answer and then try to reject the answer and then explain it again. Okay, and at the bottom, what I did was a chart about how we understand these 2 sections. So we have 3 sections. The chart at the bottom is going to be at every stage. What are we assuming section 2 is talking about? What are we assuming section 3 is talking about? Okay, that's the chart at the bottom kind of summarizes that. Now we'll learn it inside, and then you can use the chart for summary. I'm going to leave the sheet up here while I teach so that you can follow along. Sorry that the study guide is in Hebrew, but I'll explain as we go along. So now the Gemara says, so first let's just read Rabbah again. Where she's betrothed. From here you see both the father and the husband. Again, it wasn't so clear from the pshat, and that's why several questions are going to be raised. To which the Gemara says, how do you know it's talking about a betrothed woman? If she is given to a man, it sounds like she could be married to him. So the Gemara says, of course it's not talking about marriage, because the third section is talking about marriage. There's the whole third section which talks about a married woman. So, if she's living in her husband's house. That's clearly right. That's where we are here. If it's because of Nisua, here's the first answer. It can't. We have a separate pasuk about a married woman. And therefore, you can't say, again, if I jump to the chart for a minute, first they're trying to say maybe both are talking about a married woman. And then the question is, why? Well, if you want to say, why do you need 2 psukim about a married woman? Sorry, I think I skipped 3 words. Now the Gemara tries to continue and question Rabbi. Maybe both are talking about married women, and then we would have Ema travayu b'nesua v'chi tema. So now, if you want to say trei cry b'nesua lamali, why do you need 2 psukim for a nesua? L'meimal she'en abal mefer b'kodmim. Maybe the second section, again, we're really the third section. Okay, we're talking about between sections 2 and 3. Section 2 is coming to tell you that once she gets married, her husband can undo her vows. Section 3 is saying that once she's married, he can undo her vows, but not ones that were previously, right? Not like where it said in the second section, it's coming to teach you, actually, he can't do any vows that were from before. He can only do new vows. Now, this we're going to see is actually true, but it's not exactly the way they read it. To which the Gemara says, no, I'm going to answer that. Now the Gemara is going to say, but wait a minute. Isn't that something, if you look in the Ran here, or Hami I'm now looking like 10 lines in the Ran, even though it's the first words on the daf, it comes up a few little while down. If we have Beit Isha by itself, if you had the third section in Beit Isha Nidra and you didn't have right? Then you could say Debal Mefer v'She'eno Mefer b'Kodmin. But the fact that it has the section 2, which implies that he could retroactively and go deal with Nedarim that she had previously, right? When he hears about them, that perfectly proves that you can't say that it's coming to teach you that. Because if the third section is coming to teach you a married woman can't be Befer B'Kodmim, and the second section says he can, then obviously the second section is not talking about a married woman. Kind of like it's a little bit circular, but basically they're saying it can't possibly be. So you can't have, okay, if we look down to the chart, you can't say that the second section is about a married woman and the third section is about a married woman and it's coming to add the Ein Abal Mefer B'Kodmim. So now let's go to question number 2. Question number 2 is, Ema Av L'Chudem. Oh, sorry. Before we get to question number 2, my mistake. We now have a second answer to how you know it's not talking about a Nisua. So the first answer was how you know it's not talking about a married woman is because it can't possibly be that they're both married women and one is coming to teach you something new that the other one is clearly not true, right? That the husband can't annul previous vows when they're married, which means the second section can't possibly be about a married woman. Second answer to say it can't possibly be talking about marriage is because hayotiyeh leish is really always a language that connotes betrothal and not marriage. So therefore, we prove it very well that it could be talking about betrothal. And if it's talking about betrothal, we're going to now assume the father and the husband are mefer. To which the Gemara now suggests 2 more questions. Ema av lechude mefer. Maybe the father alone is the one who can be mefer. Well, that's what it says, right? It says the husband is the one who annuls the vow. So maybe when she's betrothed, only the husband can annul the vow. To which the Gemara says, Im ken, basra isar beit avia yani ota lamali. Well, then you don't need this line, basra isar beit avia, the father can annul the vow. I'm sorry, did I just say that wrong? I think I said the wrong thing. Let me just go back. Ema av lechude mefer. Maybe only the father can annul the vow. My mistake. The first question is, you'll see the third question is going to be that. The second question, which is the one we're up to now, is maybe only the father can annul the vow. Now, before we even get to the answer, the resolution of this question is, how could you possibly say that? It says if the husband hears about the vow, right, he can establish it, and then it also says he can annul it. Well, the way you would have to understand this is, first of all, the Ve'im would be a connection to the previous, and it's saying just like the father annuls the vow, then the father annuls the vow now, which again makes sense in their world. It kind of goes without saying because we all know that the father is still responsible for his daughter when she's betrothed and she's living in his house. So it would also still be bebeit avia. And then you'd have to say, so then what's this whole section about the husband? So you would have to say that the husband has veto power. What does that mean? If the father wants to annul the vow and the husband establishes it, he can prevent the father from annulling the vow. However, to annul the vow, it's sufficient just to have the father do it, that the father by himself can annul the vow. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. It's hard to read this because the Torah actually says, Vehefer Nidran, says the husband can annul the vow. Maybe somehow you'd say that subject is talking about the father. It's a difficult explanation. In any case, the Gemara is going to reject it, so I wouldn't get too hung up over it. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. If section 2 is coming to say the father can annul a vow, then then what's the whole first section coming for? Verses 4 to 6, where it says, when she takes a vow in the father's house, if the father wants to, he can go and annul her vow. What do you need that? If the father alone can annul the vow when she's betrothed, of course, of course the father can annul the vow alone when she's not betrothed, which would mean that there would be no reason for Psukim Daled Avav. If section 2, verses 7 to 9, are coming about a woman who's betrothed to say the father alone annuls the vow, then there'd be no reason for section 1. In which case, we're going to say, no, back to the beginning. So again, let's go to the chart. The suggestion here was to say, Psukim Zayin at Tet, we're talking about a betrothed woman, coming to tell you only the father can annul, not the husband. The husband can just can have veto power to prevent the father from annulling. And once they're married, only the husband. But then section 1 is totally irrelevant. To which the Gemara is going to say, V'chi tema, third question. V'chi tema. Okay, we're now up to, this was question 2, and that we answered. And now we're up to the third question. Oh, sorry. Did I miss something? Right. Sorry, I skipped a line. Ema av, we're on line number 6 in my Gemara. Ema av libai arus v'arus l'chude mefer. Maybe it's the father doesn't have the rights. Maybe it's only the husband. In other words, again, what was Rabbi trying to prove? That the father and the husband. So let's go back and assume that section 2 is talking about a betrothed woman, and it's talking about a betrothed woman, and it's saying the father, the husband can annul it. But what it's saying is the arus is the only one, the fiance is the only one who can annul a vow. So then why is the father mentioned here? Because the father is not mentioned here. That's the funny part about this. But again, the vav we're assuming in the beginning of Pasuk Zayin, verse 7, is connecting it to the previous and saying the father also has rights. So what kind of rights does he have? Well, let's do the reverse of what we just suggested in the second question. The father maybe has veto power, that if he establishes the neder, then it's established, and then the husband can annul. But really, who has power to annul? If the father doesn't do anything, the husband can annul by himself. Maybe that's what it means. And maybe it doesn't mean they both have to annul it, which is what the Mishnah said, right? And what Rabbi was trying to prove. To which the Gemara says, Im ken beit isha nidara lamai kativ. Well, if the second section is coming to teach you about the husband, when they're betrothed, only the husband annuls the vow and the father has no more rights. Well, then the third section, beit isha nidara lamai kativ, what would you need it for? It would be a kavachomer. It would be an obvious kavachomer inference. Uma bimkom av arus mefer lechude. If the father's there, then the arus, in other words, the situation where she's still living at home, even though she's betrothed, and yet the fiance can do it entirely by himself, shelo bimkom av mebaya, then you wouldn't need to tell us. Of course, the husband can annul the vows of the wife. In the third section, once they're married, it would be a totally useless thing. If in section 2, it's the husband and the father, then you need section 3 to tell you only the husband. But if section 2 is already only the husband, then you certainly don't need section 3 to say it's only the husband. To which they say, well, maybe the third section is coming to teach you. Yes, it's true. When she's betrothed, the husband alone. And fine, we'll put it on the side. And the father has veto power. Once they're married, the husband alone, but it's coming to tell you something new. In Beit Isha, and then we're going to go back to something we said before. In Beit Isha nidara lomar she'en habal mefer b'kodmim. Now it's coming to say, no, the third section has something the second section doesn't have, which is the second section said, if you remember, nidareha aleha. Even vows she previously had, the husband can annul when they're betrothed. But when she's married, he can't. He can only do things Beit Isha nidara, only when she's living in his house and took the vow then. He can't, when they're married, go back and annul things previously. So now they're suggesting, let's read it like this. Section 1 is teaching you father, right? Father can annul the vows of his daughter before she's betrothed. Once she's betrothed, only the husband. Father has veto power, but only the husband can annul the vow by himself, meaning husband on his own can annul the vow. Section 3, the husband can annul the vow, but when they're married, he can't go back and do anything that was before the marriage. Whereas when they're betrothed, he actually could go back. And then you'd be able to learn that you wouldn't necessarily be able to learn that the second section is coming to say the father annuls the vow. To which the Gemara says, what are you talking about? That is your proof. If you want to read it this way, that the third section, the new unique thing the third section is teaching you, is that only vows when they're married, he can only annul vows that she took in the house, and that's once they were married. He can't go back and annul any previous vows, even if he didn't know about them and only hears about them later, which he could do when they're engaged. Comes the Gemara, and it's going to end with this proof. Umine. That's going to be your proof. Then in section 2, it's going to have to be the husband and the father together annul the vow. Why is that? Because arus mefer b'kodmim, you're going to say that a husband who's betrothed is going to have more rights than a husband who's married? Once he's married, he can't annul anything retroactively. But when he's betrothed, he can. It doesn't make any sense. He has less rights to her when there's betrothal. Therefore, we must say, Elalav mishum shutfate da'av. What gives him the rights to annul the vows of his wife when they're betrothed, that he can even go back and annul previous ones? It's only because he's annulling them together with the father. And the father can obviously annul previous vows because he had rights to annul the vow previously. So therefore, this second section is coming to say, when she's betrothed, the father and the husband together can annul the vows. And that's why the husband can even annul previous vows, because since the father had rights to annul them, he has rights to annul them as well. But only because the two of them together are annulling vows and not the husband by himself. And that's why the law is more lenient with him and gives him more rights than when he's actually married, even though theoretically, logically, it would be the opposite. Okay, so what we've done today, maybe I'll actually bring up the study guide one more time to review. What we've done today is we took a Rabbah who said the second section was talking about a betrothed woman, the third section about a married woman, and the second section was connected to the previous one, which meant that it showed you both the husband and the father together in all the vows. We tried to say maybe both are when they're married, and the second one's coming to add this extra halacha. We rejected that. The second difficulty was trying to say maybe the second section is about a betrothed woman trying to tell us that only the father can annul them, and the husband just has veto power. If he wants to be Mekayem, established in Nedarim, then the father can't, but really the father alone. And then the third section was talking about a married woman. And according to the third question, we suggested that maybe the husband alone, the fiance, has the power and not the father. In the end, we said that can't be, because there's no way that the husband has less power when he's married than previously. So therefore, it must be the reason he has the power to go back and do earlier vows is only because of his connection with the father, because the two of them annul the vow together. And that gives him the ability to even annul previous vows, whereas he doesn't have that right when he's married, because he's the only one annulling the vows when they're married. That was Rabbah's proof. What we're going to see in the next daf is another proof as to this halacha that the father and the fiance have the power together only. Both of them need to annul the vow. Rabbi Yishmael, we're going to learn it from a different source. That we'll see tomorrow. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.